Hello and welcome back to another episode of Cyber Voices, the official podcast of the Australian Information Security Association, otherwise known as ASA. I'm your host, as always, David Willett, and it is my pleasure to have you with us as we explore the diverse voices of the Australian cyber industry. In today's episode, we dive into reasonable security and cyber risk quantification with thought leader and ASA fellow Denny Wan. Denny has expertise spanning threat modelling, policy-based mitigation strategies, and process integration. He has helped shape practical approaches to cybersecurity investment, including his recent work on the FAIR methodology, which he talks to me a lot about in today's interview. Danny and I talked at length, so this will be part one of a two-part interview. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy Cyber Voices.
Hi, David. How are you?
Good. This is a bit of a privilege at the moment. So for people listening at home, just so you know, we are recording this on CyberCon Eve.
Mm-hmm.
So, while CyberCon will be done by the time you're listening to this, it's a very exciting time for Denny and I because we've got 3 very busy days coming up.
Absolutely.
You are incredibly busy at CyberCon. How many talks are you doing?
3.
3
each day. Well, max out. You can only have maximum of 3.
You can only do a maximum of 3. I should know that. 3. So what are some of your topics at CyberCon?
Well, first off, tomorrow I will be speaking with Anna Hacker. We're going to talk about risk disclosure as a lawyer, because expect that's what lawyers focus on. And we're going to talk about disclosure of cyber risk, as well as general AI risk.
Mm-hmm.
Is like,
topical, everyone. Just that little thing that everyone's wondering about.
I will even say that anything you put AI, people just come. It's just for the curiosity factor. You're like, what else is safer? It really doesn't matter much. Until later, they regret it. Is why do I come and listen and waste my time? Not. But our conversation is how do you make these sort of disclosure, both cyber risk and AI risk, defensible? Like, how can you convince people that you're not making up the numbers? Often, allegedly, people made up the numbers. I'm sure you never heard of that before.
People making stuff up in cyber? Never heard of it. No. Wouldn't dream of it. No.
So not in our community, right? Yeah, right.
One of the brilliant things about CyberCon, it's a great time to come together and really pressure test each other and hear from each other on what is burning in our professional lives at the moment.
Absolutely.
AI is one of them. And of course, a big personality within ASA.
Mm-hmm.
So
thank you.
You are you're welcome.
Yeah.
You're welcome. You are the first ever ASA fellow that we have had on the program. So thank you so much for joining us.
It's my honor.
There may be some people out there that don't actually know what that means. So can you tell me a little bit about what it means to be an ASA fellow and what it also means for the broader ASA community?
Yeah, maybe I can describe both sides of the fence. So what it means to be a fellow is, recognizing someone with demonstrate experience in the community and a passion for advancing in the mission of ASA, which is to educate the community on cyber risk. The vision ASA. I've been involved in ASA from the inception. If I can brag a little bit about, and I still use the word bragging quite seriously, is my membership number is 97. 2 digits. I said, and I probably can't sell the numbers, I don't think, against the rules, but if I could, maybe...
We should get you a name tag with 97 on it.
Yeah. That's a cool one. But on the recipient side, as a recipient, award is a huge honor because, among the almost 13,000 pay members at the moment, not exactly a number, but I think it's around 13,000. There's only a handful of people recognize ASA, so it is really a huge honor. And hopefully I'm serving my role as improving the communication and the mission of ASA in terms of, demystifying cybersecurity, which is really important for day-to-day life.
And, you touched on something there about what it means to be selected to be part of FASA, as we call it, the Fellowship of ASA. And that is quite an extensive career and almost lifetime of service to enhancing the cybersecurity in Australia. You also mentioned there that you like to demystify cyber risk as a business problem. Now, can you tell me a little bit more about what is your approach to demystifying cyber risk, and who are you demystifying it for? Who's your target audience?
Let me start with the second question.
Sure.
The audience, everyone, like all of us. And of course, there's increasing recognition that cybersecurity is not a technology problem, technology enabled, of course, but is a business problem. And I would put to you that that's not a view generally accepted today. For nothing else, easy to blame technology. Politicians need to really bring people together, not inflame the situation often is weaponized. And this is really what I meant to demystify that, to really understand that choices are available, including cultural situation, build trust, and give people confidence that there are alternative way forward, and we need to pull together as a society and economy. So thank you for that setting, and you're probably aware, and I'm quite well known in the ASA community and then the broader cybersecurity community as a champion of a risk measurement standard called FAIR, standard factor analysis information risk. And in fact, my mission as an ASA fellow, that's why I'm here speaking with you, David, is reflective of the effort I put in the community to raise awareness of the availability of the standard. And often is considered measuring risk, particularly intangible risk like cyber or AI risk or privacy risk, really can only based on opinion and experience. It's not my place to tell people or even advise them they should change the way they measure risk. But just simply draw attention to the availability. That standard published by the Open Group, which is not necessarily well known to a lot of audience neither, but Open Group is also published TOGAP, and I think TOGAP is much better recognized by community. TOGAP is an enterprise architecture standard, but it's not technology training or certification. It's a framework to measure the value enterprise architecture designed in business terms, or I call it in financial dollar value, so that investment enterprise architecture can prioritized and FAIR as a sister standard to FAIR is also enabling the measurement of cyber risk in dollar value to inform the prioritizing investment, but not the technology. And that prioritization, perhaps this will help us to close the loop, is broader communication and cybersecurity control and risk management as an economic challenge and a society challenge. Is that closing conversation by enabling the whole of community come together and agree on the prioritization effort. Then once the prioritizations have been agreed on, then the specialists like yourself can determine the best technology to deploy.
Now, I know that you are FAIR is something that you feel quite strongly about as a business language for cyber risk. Can you kind of give us the real high level, like what is the FAIR standard and why are you encouraging people to adopt it?
The FAIR standard is a standard to break down the risk scenarios. And the standard is not a very long standard, nothing like NIST, even CSF, no controls, no technology, simple mathematics, but it's a business standard, really just explain how to break down risk scenarios. And it consists primarily of a four-level taxonomy, which is risk is really the collective impact from the frequency of the incident, like how frequently an incident results in a loss, and the loss magnitude per incident, such as ALG, annualized loss expectancy. A lot of members were familiar with that. So FAIR is not a cryptic technology, open source, and it's free to download. Perhaps, and thank you for mentioning that both the Notion ambassador and a very privileged to also be named the FAIR ambassador by the FAIR Institute. And I think a better way to understand the recognition, I said that in my acceptance speech, is I'm an ambassador and ambassadors because everyone in the FAIR community are themselves ambassadors by firstly spending effort to learn FAIR and to convince the others this is a useful conversation to really bridge the conversation between cyber and non-cyber leaders.
Who is the target audience for FAIR?
Not necessarily people on the tools and different DAOs. Those folks probably more leaning towards the B side or the IT risk side because cyber people are setting policies and they want to think about the impact. Simple things like MFA, and of course we know MFA adoption is still a problem. It's not because of technology constraint. People just feel not wanting to use it is a burden. And from there, the audience from those initial group like our members would then reach out to all the other members in our society, you and me, every person, every citizen, because it is those people we need to communicate.
So I'm trying to sort of figure out where it fits, right? Because when in our day jobs, there's a lot of frameworks. We've got regulatory stuff to worry about. We've got everything the federal government is introducing in this space. We've got Essential 8s. We've got NIST CSF that you mentioned. And then there's always different risk frameworks and all that kind of stuff. FAIR seems to lean more into the quantification of business risk and the prioritization of business risk based on financial impact. Is that the right way to paraphrase it?
Yeah. So the quantification and expression, which I call as expression in dollar values financial terms, is a means to the end. The end is to create a value proposition. So I started out as my profession as an auditor with IBM Global Services, one of the two winning dinosaurs. I hope no IBM people on the call were offended by that comment, but I'm one of those people. And yes, and as an auditor, I learned that security is a business risk, and I was surprised when I started as an auditor at IBM. I did not report in IT. I reported the CFO in New York in IBM. And that was insightful. And gradually I learned that unless you can explain cybersecurity in those financial terms, it mean nothing to the business. And people just ignoring it and try to circumvent it because it sees as a burden until they suffer a loss and they ask, why didn't you do something to help me to prevent it?
But naturally, that conversation changes depending on which part of the business you're talking to. But making that link to a financial risk is probably key for a lot of people because if you don't make the CFO, for example, understand, well, then where's your money ever going to come from to try and mature your approach to how you're managing security?
I can take advantage of this very moment of the focus is to introduce a new standard that most member point never heard of, and in fact most people in the industry never heard of, called NIST IR 8286. And that title standard probably tells you all is called integrating cybersecurity with enterprise risk management. It was published in November 2019, almost 5 years ago now. And it's a very short standard, no technology, nothing like 853 or even CSF, something like 80 pages. But it named FAIR as an enabler for the very simple reason. Cybersecurity is probably the only risk management area, including IT risk, that are not already integrated enterprise risk management. And of course, as in your role as CISO at a true, enterprise risk management integration is vital to secure your budget for your IT budget, right? And of course, fall under cyber budget. And a lot of cyber budget are instrumented under the CSF for the machine journey, right? And without the measurement and able to track under ELM, sometimes the stakeholder may felt uncertain of the value investment. They might then, when time become tough, right now economy is tough, they might try to chip at the cyber budget because it's not functional. You don't see it. You're not keeping the lights on. Well, it does affect the light not carrying on, but that's a secondary step, and there's a causation debate. So NIST 836 is NIST blueprint to operationalize NIST CFF. And it's important, that recognition. So I hope, for nothing else, our audience take away from this call, please check out NIST IR 8286, Integrating Cybersecurity with Enterprise Risk Management.
Right. Now, you're touching on there, where is the real risk when it comes to cybersecurity? Because it's no longer just a technology issue. Technology alone is now insufficient for effective cyber defenses. What are the conversations that you're having, and how do some of these frameworks that you're leaning into address that problem? What's the right ratio of technology versus people versus process in terms of addressing cyber risk?
I think there's probably a number of ways to respond to that. And of course, in Australian context, the Home Affairs PSPA framework and is a good way to answer that balance. And in fact, I was attending a security and government conference a couple of weeks ago in Canberra, and which just a week before PSPF 2024 was published, which expanded PSPF to include 2 additional domains, which is risk and technology, from 4 to 6. So that balance, PSPF including people risk, physical security risk, as you know, and then ISM come under the cybersecurity risk. And ISM, of course, has been written in 2018 to be risk-based rather than compliance. And but to answer I think that my answer to your question is, I really not advocating any particular framework because they're much more learned colleague in ASA. They're much more expert in all the security standard. But what I see the value and what I'm passionate about and why this conversation is to draw attention to the availability of the risk management approach. Core standard, you must, fair is a standard, okay, well, core standard. But just aware that is a structured way, a defensible way to measure risk. And it's not necessarily the risk measure is correct. That's not objective, no guarantee of that. But to be able to expose assumptions you are used in drawing risk measurement. And often the question is, how do you measure an intangible risk that is intangible? Means you can't measure it by definition. It's like saying sugar is sweet, right? It's a conversation, a circular argument.
What's an intangible risk? What's an example of that you've come across?
Cyber risk.
Cyber risk.
Yeah, they're intangible. And this is where a key component of fair standard is drawing on to a insight from a gentleman, his name called Douglas Hubbard. And he wrote a couple of books called How to Measure Anything Intangible in Business, and particularly his more recent book, How to Measure Anything Intangible in Cybersecurity. And his methodology called AIE is called Applied Information Economics. And he has 2 parameters, which is, I think, the better way to think about, understand his thinking than AIE is an acronym, is number 1, when you think something is intangible business risk, means you can't measure it. That's why it's intangible, but you care about it. Otherwise, you won't talk about it. You care about it, well, you can measure it, because I can ask you, how do you come to a conclusion there's a risk? And the second part is you calibrate people of sometimes unconscious, sometimes conscious, inflate or underplay the risk for a reason. So the 2 core components are any intangible risk we can measure because you care. You tell me why you care, I can find the data source where you draw that inference. It's inference. And maybe the data set is somewhat outdated. So therefore, the second part, calibration. So this is really where we encourage our members to check out FAIR and AIU to empower themselves with this completely open sourced and give them confidence in the risk measurement when they're communicating their proposal to others.
Yeah, and there's a lot of what you're touching on here, which is really about helping our audience try and find what is the right approach for you to measure the intangible,
Yeah.
as you sort of call it. I wonder how much of a measurement or forecasting of cyber risk is a little bit of a finger in the air at times. You know, we're drawing on a lot of, well, we've seen this elsewhere, and our understanding of the environment means that, hey, this is how big the impact could be. There's a lot of guesswork behind it, isn't there, at times?
It is. And I think we must recognize that risk management by nature is based on human instinct. Has to be.
I hope I haven't just unveiled our secret sauce as security professionals that sometimes we just guess.
and it is a necessary approach. What NIST 8036 I mentioned, that standard before, is NIST recognizing that you need to strike a balance between the professional approach, the management control framework, NIST CSF 853, 17, all those control standard, and communicating the risk so that the non-cyber leaders, the rest of the community, the people whose lives are directly affected, to understand and be able to work collectively to minimize the risk, right? So the communication part is the consumption of the fair measurement. And if I can use it to give myself another plug, I'm also very honored to be recently also named, in addition to being a fair ambassador, is ambassador for risk management for CI ISAC, Critical Infrastructure Information Security Sharing Australia Network. And so I bring that specialization to improve the communication of risk measurement. As you said, if this is everything is just based on opinion, we're going to cause chaos in the community, because when people's life at risk and in the asset and future at risk, they might jump to conclusion, and we don't have social cohesion. So NIST recognizing that, and NIST has done a great job from version 1.1 to 2, but NIST as a standard body, as a thought leader, recognize that cybersecurity can no longer live outside the organization-wide risk management process with ERM. And what's lacking is a risk measurement.
So I'm very driven by results and getting things done. And I have come into roles before, into organizations where they paralyzing themselves with the amount of risk analysis they're doing and the amount of reports and assurance activities they've invested in around NIST and around Essential 8. Everything saying, oh, God, this is, we're not mature in everything, but not actually ever getting on with the work. Do you see much of that? And going back to what my actual question was what's the ratio? Like, how do you stop yourself from getting into that analysis paralysis?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think this is what actually motivated me to start learning about FAIR 6-7 years ago, when I've started form the senior chapter of the FAIR Institute, is recognizing that as an auditor, often we complain our analysis and recommendations being ignored and being lip service. It's like, we don't audit, we audit problem. And I think it's exactly the same reason that I'm IRAP trained by ASD, that the ASD decided to terminate IRAP certifications, but mandated IRAP assessment. So the reason being that the notion of certification could be misleading, a false sense of assurance. And I think the consumption of what I was explaining is that the ratio has to be an eye of the beholder. And my role as ambassador is to draw attention to the availability of the tools. It could be probably not a right analogy to think about the ratio between your breathing, right? It depends on when you're sleeping, you're running, right? So your body naturally drives that. But often, what caused the paralysis is not an analysis, is the distrust and disagreement. in the risk measurement, because often, when particularly in receiving end of a decision, you felt your risk measurement being ignored.
Mm-hmm.
And vice versa, people who receive risk measurement felt being inflated, called fudge. But it is just the reality of life is that often the risks are focused, and we call it fudge. It's a matter of opinion. And that opinion needs to be moved from the perception of opinion to a standard-based risk measurement. So the risk measurement, rather than the risk model, which is you ask, the ratio, help to break the impasse and build trust with the communication. And I advocate that the measure success for my conversation risk measurement, perhaps not to get the agreement or endorsement, the risk measurement. The measurement itself might not be correct because the assumption might be valid, but bring people together for conversation. And I characterize that as agreeing to disagree. Now, that sounds paradoxical. When people do disagree, what's the point? The point is now your starting point. You now know what you're disagreeing. Now you can negotiate. Mm-hmm. Is it because process cost or supply chain cost that you refuse to apply and enforce MFA? Of course, MFA is still a huge problem that national government draw attention to, Home Affairs draw attention to. And to solve the problem, like casual speeding, like failure of people to wear seatbelt or wear seatbelt correctly, we had to address that risk measurement and correct aberration in the way people measure the risk. Mm-hmm. And when people are prepared to challenge themselves and look at the data source and ask themselves, is that risk measurement still appropriate and reflect the reality? When they're prepared to open their conversation, then it's the next step.
Fantastic. I hope you enjoyed part 1 of my chat with Denny. Make sure that you subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts from to get notified when part 2 goes live and to hear more Cyber Voices. Thank you for listening to another episode of Cyber Voices. Our music is by Sanar Garut, our show artwork is by Studio Quarantine, and we record our show at This Is a Studio in Pran, Melbourne, part of Popplant Productions. Please make sure you follow the show on your podcast platform of choice and leave us a 5-star review. This will help others find the show. Also, please follow the association on LinkedIn and Instagram. If you want to add your voice to our ever-growing chorus of diverse cyber voices, have questions, feedback, or would like to be a sponsor, you can do so by emailing us at cybervoices@aisa.org.au. That's cybervoices@aisa.org.au. Are you an AISA member? If not, you should consider joining our network of over 12,000 members across Australia. An AISA membership can open doors, build professional networks, create lifetime friendships, and offer exclusive training, events, and other perks. Become a member today by heading to our website at aisa.org.au. That is all for today. I hope you will join us again next time on Cyber Voices.